My sister, who always tries to make me feel poor, announced she bought a new condo and invited me over just to belittle me. A few days later, she teased, "Bet you've never seen a penthouse before." I smiled, walked out to the balcony, and said, "Actually. This entire building? I own it." She dropped her wine. My sister has always belittled me for not flaunting wealth the way she does. She recently moved into a fancy condo downtown and invited me over just to rub it in. She joked that I'd probably never seen a penthouse before. What she didn't know was that I'm actually the developer and majority owner of the entire building. I finally told her. She literally dropped her wine glass on the balcony. "So? What do you think?" Helena asked, swirling her wine like she was hosting a gala. I looked around the spotless condo, tastefully decorated but clearly meant to impress. It was beautiful, no doubt. "It's a great unit," I said casually. She sipped, then smirked. "Bet you've never seen a penthouse before." I smiled and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The balcony door slid open with a whisper. I stepped outside, breathing in the late afternoon breeze and the muted sounds of San Diego below. "Actually," I turned around. "This entire building? I own it." And just like that, her wine glass slipped through her hand and shattered. Helena and I were raised under the same roof in Oak Park, a tree-lined suburb outside Chicago. Our parents weren't wealthy, but they were honest, good people. Our dad was a high school teacher. Our mom worked part-time at the library and ran a side hustle knitting and selling scarves in winter. They taught us values, not luxury. Growing up, Helena always had this unshakable desire to be admired. I remember how she'd cut out pages from fashion magazines and tape them to her mirror. When we were teenagers, she'd host sleepovers and angle for compliments about her clothes, her hair, the way she walked. I, on the other hand, was the quiet sibling. Bookish. Practical. I saved my allowance. She spent hers in a day. By the time we'd both reached our 20s, the differences between us were even more stark. She moved to Los Angeles, to chase dreams, at first acting, then modeling, then eventually landing in high-end real estate. To her credit, she was good at it. She could talk a buyer into overpaying for a unit with barely any amenities just with her confidence alone. I stayed in Chicago and started from the bottom, literally. My first job was assisting a contractor who specialized in home renovations. Then I went into property management. Saved everything I could. Eventually I invested in a 4-unit building on the south side. I fixed it up, rented it out, refinanced, and repeated the process. I never told Helena much about it. Not because I was hiding anything, she just never asked. Our conversations were always centered around her. Her career, her outfits, her dating life. Anytime I shared something about my life, she'd find a way to pivot back to herself or throw in a dig that made me feel small. "You still renting?" she asked during one Thanksgiving dinner, swirling mashed potatoes on her plate. "No," I replied. "I bought something modest last year." "Oh. Cute." "A starter home," she said, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear. That was Helena in a nutshell. Polished on the outside, competitive and cutting underneath. I learned early on not to share too much, and when I did succeed, I kept it quiet. Success was more satisfying when it didn't need applause. I'd been working in property development for over a decade by the time the San Diego project started. It was one of the biggest ventures I had taken on, a high-rise luxury condo building near the Gaslamp Quarter, with rooftop gardens, state-of-the-art amenities, smart appliances, and floor-to-ceiling glass views. We broke ground 5 years ago, and I sunk most of my liquidity into the early stages. There were nights I stayed awake wondering if I had made a mistake, if I was in over my head. But it worked. The units sold fast. Word got around that it was one of the most architecturally unique towers in the city. The kind of place ambitious professionals dream of retiring in. I didn't slap my name on it. I never do. The operating company had a different name, the management company another. I kept my face and name out of press releases. That's just how I operate. Then one day, a couple of months back, I got a text from Helena. Guess who just closed on a brand new condo in San Diego? Smiley face. You have to come see it. I asked for the address out of curiosity. When she sent it, I almost laughed out loud. Of all the buildings in all of California, she'd bought a place in mine. For a moment, I thought about telling her. I typed out the words, "I own that building," then deleted them. Something inside me said to wait. The moment I arrived at her condo, I knew why she invited me. Not to show off her place, but to remind me, again, of what she thought I didn't have. Her voice had that same smug inflection I remembered from years of holiday dinners and phone calls where she'd brag about flying first class, about her exclusive clients, about networking with celebrities. The condo itself was as extravagant as I expected. Neutral colors, high-end finishes, carefully placed art, expensive wine glasses staged just so. It wasn't just a home, it was a statement. She strutted through the rooms like a tour guide at an open house. I had the backsplash custom done, she said at one point, motioning to the kitchen. $12,000 just for that. I nodded politely. You should really consider something like this, she added. Might be a little stretch, but it'd be good for your self-esteem. That one stung, but I let it roll off me. Then she made the joke about the penthouse, that smug, joking tone that wasn't really a joke at all. I think she genuinely believed I had never been in a building like this before. That I wouldn't know what imported marble or smart glass looked like. That's when I stepped onto the balcony and told her the truth. She stared at me like I had just confessed to being an astronaut or royalty. And then, she dropped her glass. The wine hit the floor and pooled between the sleek concrete tiles, seeping slowly to the edge. Helena opened her mouth, closed it again. She looked from my phone, where I'd shown her the ownership documents, to the skyline beyond us. I think, in that moment, something in her fractured. I don't understand, she finally whispered. I shrugged. There's a lot you never asked me about. Helena stood there, quiet for maybe the first time in our adult lives. It was an odd moment, watching my sister, the one who always had something to say, rendered speechless. She looked out over the view, her glass now a cracked piece of crystal at her feet, wine staining the pale tile beneath us. I don't understand, she repeated. Her voice was smaller now. Gone was the confident, performative tone she'd carried for years. It was like a mask had slipped. She looked at me, really looked at me, like she was trying to process the version of me that didn't fit her narrative. I thought, you lived in that little house in Oak Park, she said, still dazed. I do, I said. I like it there. But you own this? Yes. There wasn't pride in my voice. Not gloating, not a power play. Just fact. It was all true. She just never imagined it could be. I watched as she sank onto one of the balcony chairs, wine forgotten. She looked stunned, like someone had pulled the rug out from under her entire worldview. And in a way, maybe they had. She had spent years crafting an identity where she was the successful one, the glamorous one, the leader, the achiever. And maybe, subconsciously, she needed me to be the underachiever to make that identity work. The simple sibling. The frugal one. The one with potential, but who never quite got there. It gave her an edge. It gave her something to feel superior about. What she didn't understand, or maybe never took the time to ask, was that I never wanted any of that spotlight. She used money as a measuring stick. I saw it as a tool. She collected status. I built quietly, long-term. For a while, neither of us said anything. Finally, she looked up and asked, "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I looked at her for a long moment. The question felt so layered, not just about the building, but about everything. Because, I said, every time I tried to share something real with you, you turned it into a competition. Her eyes flickered. She didn't deny it. I never needed you to be proud of me, I added. But it would have been nice to be seen. She looked back out at the view. Sunset was bleeding across the glass buildings around us, casting long shadows. The city was lighting up slowly, one window at a time. I knew this skyline better than most, I had been a part of shaping it. I always thought you were. I don't know, content being average, she said finally. I nodded slowly. That's the thing, Helena. I am content. That's the part you never understood. There was a long pause. I could feel the air between us shift again, no longer sharp, but heavy. Tired, even. I'm sorry, she said. It was quiet, almost inaudible. I don't think I knew how to, not compare, she went on. You were always so steady. I felt like I had to be the one who shined. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I'd been waiting for that kind of honesty from her my entire adult life, but now that it came, I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even hurt anymore. I was just tired of pretending. She picked up the broken pieces of her wine glass and walked them inside. I followed, still processing everything. The penthouse was silent, the kind of silence that didn't feel awkward, more like a pause, a break in the tension that had hummed under our relationship for years. I didn't buy this place to show off, she said suddenly. I mean, maybe a part of me did. But mostly, I think I wanted to feel like I'd finally made it. You already had, I said gently. You just didn't believe it. She sank onto the couch. I could see the exhaustion in her, not just physical, but emotional. The kind that builds over years of trying to prove something to the world, and maybe even more to herself. For the first time in a very long while, she looked like someone I used to know, not the version she created for others, but the real her. The girl who used to build castles out of couch cushions. The one who once gave me half of her Halloween candy after I dropped mine in the rain. The one who used to say, "It's us against the world." When did that change? Maybe slowly. Maybe all at once. And now, here we were, two adults on opposite sides of a life neither of us fully understood about the other, sitting in a luxury penthouse one of us bought and the other built, both of us quietly wondering how we got here. I didn't stay long after that. We sat there in the penthouse, not talking much, just existing in that weird stillness where two people finally see each other clearly, maybe for the first time in years. There was no big breakdown, no dramatic speech, no shouting match. Just a quiet reckoning. A recognition of how far apart we'd drifted, and how long we'd pretended otherwise. When I stood to leave, she didn't try to stop me. She just walked with me to the door, barefoot now, glass still in her hand. Her makeup was perfect, her hair pinned into some elegant knot at the nape of her neck. But there was something in her eyes that made her look like a child again, uncertain, searching. I don't know what to say, she said as I reached for the handle. You don't have to say anything, I replied. Just think about what mattered before all this. She nodded. Slowly. Almost imperceptibly. And that was it. I walked down the hallway to the elevator. Alone. The mirrored walls of the lift reflected a version of me I hadn't paid much attention to in years. A little older. A little tired. But calm. Whole. That night, I drove back to my hotel, nothing fancy, just a clean, quiet room by the harbor. I sat on the balcony for a while, watching the city wind down, the buzz fading into stillness. My phone buzzed once. It was a message from Helena, "Thank you for coming. I'm sorry if I made you feel less than. You never were." I stared at the screen for a long time, rereading the words. She'd never said anything like that to me before, not as kids, not as adults, not even in passing. I didn't reply. I just put the phone down and let myself feel the weight of it. I thought about our childhood then, the small bedrooms, the hand-me-down furniture, the kitchen with the cracked linoleum floors. I remembered the nights we used to lie on the living room carpet, making up stories about our futures. She always imagined being on magazine covers. I imagined building things that lasted. We weren't enemies, not really. We were just built differently, and somewhere along the way, that difference became a wall. She leaned into the image of success, curated, polished, public. I leaned into substance, slow, steady, private. But I guess when you spend your life performing wealth, someone quietly living it might look invisible. The next morning, I drove over to another property site just outside La Jolla, a new sustainable housing development I'd been working on with a group of local architects and engineers. It was the kind of project that made me feel good, affordable, efficient, beautiful. It didn't have the sparkle of Helena's condo tower, but it mattered. It would outlive all of us. While I walked the site with my project manager, he mentioned casually that one of the brokers we'd worked with had heard that someone from media was trying to figure out who owned the downtown tower. I didn't flinch. Helena wouldn't do that, not anymore. I believed that. I hoped that. Later that week, I got a call from our mother. She sounded chipper in the way she did when trying to act like everything was normal. "Your sister told me you stopped by her place," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "It's nice." She said it was a bit of a surprise visit. That made me pause. "Did she say anything else?" "She said she learned something about you. Said she's thinking a lot about things lately." That was enough for me. I didn't press. Mom didn't know what had happened, not the full weight of it. She just knew something had shifted. And that, maybe, was enough. A few days later, I received an email from Helena. Not a text, not a voice note. A full email. That in itself was strange. The last time she wrote me anything more than an emoji was probably 10 years ago. I opened it, expecting a quick apology or maybe a few platitudes. It wasn't short. It was a full-on letter. She started by saying she was sorry. Not just for the condo visit, but for years of digs, comments, passive-aggressive jokes. She admitted that she often felt the need to be bigger, brighter, because deep down, she feared being average. That our upbringing had felt limiting to her, and that she thought the only way out was to become someone other people admired, and if that meant building herself up by pushing me down, she did it without thinking. She said she never really stopped to consider how that felt from my side. Then she wrote something that stuck with me: "You never needed the world to see you. But I think, on some level, I needed you to see me. And I went about it all wrong." I sat with that line for a while. She ended by saying she didn't expect things to magically fix themselves. That she knew trust wasn't a faucet you turn on. But she wanted to try, not just as siblings, but as people who once loved each other before everything got complicated. It was the most real thing she'd ever sent me. And for the first time in a long time, I believed her. I didn't reply to Helena's email right away. I didn't ignore it, either. I read it more than once. 3 times, actually. Once sitting in my office at the Chicago loft I used for work when I wasn't on a project site. Once during a flight to Austin for a real estate summit. And once more late at night, lying in bed, the glow of my laptop illuminating the ceiling as I stared past the screen, just thinking. The words were different this time. She wasn't just apologizing, she was reckoning with something. Herself, maybe. Or the years of carefully crafted image building she finally seemed to realize had cost her more than she'd gained. Either way, it felt honest. And rare. Still, something in me hesitated. Not out of anger. But out of self-preservation. For so long, I had been on the receiving end of her digs, her little jabs at my lifestyle, the way she made success feel like a race I wasn't even aware I was running. Part of me wondered if this letter was a genuine attempt to repair, or another performance, a rebranding of sorts. But another part of me, well, I wanted to believe her. Not for her sake, but for mine. So I waited a week. And then I wrote back. I didn't mirror her length. Mine was shorter. Direct. I appreciate your email. And I believe you meant what you said. I'm not angry, and I don't want to be cold, I just need time. I hope we can find a better way forward, but it has to be different this time. No performances. No comparisons. Just honest conversations. If you're open to that, so am I. I hit send and closed my laptop. Then I sat back and stared out the window. It was snowing lightly, the kind of snow that doesn't stick, just drifts gently past the glass and reminds you that seasons change, even when people don't. She didn't respond right away. But I didn't need her to. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for her to give me anything. Not validation. Not recognition. Not even an apology. I'd made peace with the distance between us. What I hadn't made peace with was the question of whether we could ever really bridge it. A few weeks passed. Then, on a random Thursday evening, I got a call. It was Helena. Not a text. Not an email. An actual call. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before picking up. "Hey," I said. "Hi," she replied, her voice low and unsure. That in itself was a strange tone for her. Helena was rarely unsure. Even when she was bluffing. "I'm not calling to fix everything," she said quickly. "I just wanted to talk. If that's okay." "Yeah. It's okay." There was a silence that followed. Not awkward, exactly. Just unfamiliar. Like we were standing on new ground and trying to figure out how solid it was before taking a step. She told me a bit about her life, the parts she didn't usually share. Not the polished stuff. Not the events or the staged photos or the designer purchases. The quiet stuff. The loneliness. The burnout. The moments when she realized she didn't have many people who knew her beyond the surface. "I think I built something that looks really good from the outside," she said. "But it doesn't feel like home most days." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I understand." We talked for about 30 minutes. Nothing earth-shattering. Nothing dramatic. Just two people, siblings, starting to talk like humans again. By the time the call ended, we both sounded lighter. Like something had shifted. Over the next few months, we started talking more. Not every day. Not even every week. But when we did, the tone was different. More grounded. Less curated. She asked about my projects, and actually listened. I asked about hers, and she didn't embellish. We were learning to talk like equals, or maybe like allies, for the first time in decades. She invited me back to San Diego in early spring. "No wine this time," she joked. "And no ego." I agreed to visit. But this time I booked a place of my own. Not because I didn't trust her. But because boundaries are easier to hold when you're not under someone else's roof, even if you technically own the building. When I arrived, she greeted me at the curb. No big show. No velvet heels or flowing silk robes. Just jeans, a sweater, and a look I hadn't seen in a long time, something close to humility. Or maybe clarity. She didn't give me a tour. Didn't flaunt anything. We just sat on her balcony with coffee and watched the city breathe. "I've been going to therapy," she said suddenly. "I needed someone to help me figure out why I kept comparing myself to everyone. Especially you." I looked at her, surprised. "Especially me?" "Yeah," she said. "You were always the one who actually had it together." "I didn't understand how you could be so content without all this," she said, gesturing vaguely around us. "It made me feel insecure. So I tried to convince myself you were behind. That I was ahead. That I'd won something." I nodded slowly. "I never knew we were in a race." She smiled sadly. "Neither did I. Until I realized I was the only one running." There was something achingly honest about that. And a little heartbreaking, too. I could see the exhaustion in her. Not from work. But from the effort it takes to maintain a version of yourself for everyone else. I'd never lived that way, but I could imagine how heavy it must be. "I don't want to compete with you anymore," she said. "You don't have to," I replied. "You never did." The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the balcony. I looked out over the skyline I'd helped build, remembering how many years I spent focused on creating things that would last. Maybe this, whatever was forming between us now, could be one of those things, too. A few months after that visit, I got an email from one of the building's senior property managers about an issue with one of the units. A resident had filed several complaints: noise, misuse of the shared gym, late-night gatherings on the rooftop without proper booking. When I opened the incident report, I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. It was Helena. The new version of her, the one I'd had honest conversations with, hadn't vanished. But old habits die hard, and apparently, she was slipping back into the persona that once made her feel powerful. Hosting socialites on the rooftop. Bringing influencers up to the penthouse for impromptu photo shoots. Turning the building into a backdrop for her brand again. I wasn't angry. Just disappointed. I forwarded the report to her personally. She called me later that evening. "I didn't know it was that serious," she said, her tone sharp, defensive, like the old Helena. "They didn't mention it was being escalated to you." "It wasn't supposed to be," I replied calmly. "But I saw your name. Figured I should handle it directly." Silence on her end. "I'm not mad," I added. "But you need to respect the rules. You're not just a resident here, you're a reflection of the kind of culture this building either allows or doesn't." Another pause. Then, in a tone somewhere between embarrassment and bitterness, "Kind of ironic, don't you think?" "What is?" "That I live in your building. That I'm just a name on your spreadsheets." I let her words sit there. Heavy. True. She was used to being on the top of the social ladder. She was not used to being beneath someone's authority, let alone mine. "I don't want you to feel small," I said carefully. "But I also won't let you act like you're above everyone else here." It was a strange shift in the dynamic, me speaking like a landlord, not a brother. And her, for once, having to acknowledge that this wasn't her domain. It was mine. That, right there, was the quiet revenge. Not humiliation. Not cruelty. Just the unmistakable reality that the person she'd spent years trying to one-up had quietly become the one holding the keys. Literally. She apologized again. A more measured version this time. And I could tell, it wasn't just to smooth things over. It was real. She understood now. Not just that I owned the building, but that she had spent years chasing a version of status that could be taken away at any time, by someone like me. Someone she never thought to look up to. We didn't fall out after that. In fact, something about that moment made things more honest between us. She scaled things back, started showing up differently. She asked questions instead of making assumptions. She even reached out to the building's community manager and offered to host a networking mixer for residents, low-key, well-organized, and respectful of guidelines. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was a mature one. Later that summer, I hosted a private event on the rooftop, something I did once a year for a few close friends, partners, and project collaborators. It wasn't flashy. No influencers, no media. Just a sunset dinner with good food and better company. Helena came. She was invited, of course. But this time, she didn't make it about her. She mingled, listened, laughed softly at stories instead of dominating conversations. She brought a bottle of wine, good wine, and handed it to me with a knowing smile. As the evening wore on and the sky turned amber, she found me at the edge of the terrace. "You did all this," she said quietly. "I had help," I replied. "Still," she said, "it's yours. You built it. And I spent years thinking I was the one who had something to teach you." I didn't say anything. She turned to me and asked, "Do you think I'll ever stop trying to impress people?" "I think you've already started." She nodded slowly. Then, with a small grin, "You know, I told a friend I was related to the owner, and she didn't believe me." I raised an eyebrow. "Did you show her the deed?" "No," she said, laughing. "I just told her you like keeping things quiet." That you don't need to prove anything to anyone. That moment, right there, that was it. That was the real revenge. Not the kind you see in movies, not the explosive takedown or the dramatic confrontation. Just quiet, undeniable proof that I didn't need to flaunt anything. I built something lasting. And the one person who always tried to make me feel small was now learning, slowly, what it meant to respect what I'd built, and who I'd become. Helena's journey wasn't over. Neither was mine. But now, we were finally walking in the same direction. Not competing. Not comparing. Just walking. Sometimes revenge doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to hurt. Sometimes, the most satisfying form of it is being exactly who they said you'd never be, and watching them realize you were never the one who needed to catch up. They were the ones who never bothered to look over and see who you already were.